So somebody might as well just lay it out for you and say culture is for the convenience of culture, not you. And if you don't think culture is your enemy, ask the 18-year-old kid who is given a rifle and sent to the other side of the world to murder strangers if culture is his friend. It's a kind of a con game. It is, in fact, strangely enough, a kind of virtual reality. Once you start talking about race pride, loyalty, our destiny, our God, our mission, it's like building virtual realities. And people begin to treat these things as though they had the substantiality of real objects. You're choosing to limit yourself to a cultural reality, whether it's the reality of being Witoto or Orthodox Jewish or whatever it is. It's a smaller world than the simple hardware you were born into this universe with. And the substances, the drugs, the plants, the things which perturb consciousness, they don't address cultural values. They blast through them. They perturb these information fields outside of the relativistic set of values that the culture is giving you.
In this video, I'm going to be talking about subject matter that nobody wants to talk about because everybody is living in fear about it, because nobody understands really the whole situation of drugs, and the whole situation of drugs has been so inappropriately presented to human beings. I mean, when you say drugs, you could mean baby Tylenol PM, and you could mean freebase heroin. Both of these are drugs, equally so. And how are you supposed to make sense of a situation when you say the word drugs and you could be referring to something that can put someone in prison for life, and you can also be referring to something that could perhaps heal a person of cancer? And it's my opinion that this has been purposefully done to empathize the ability for people to be able to appropriately cognize and understand the entire world of drugs, whether it's illicit or stuff that you get over the counter down at the drugstore. And until a dialogue and a vocabulary can be established whereby people are not freaked out or confused completely just by bringing up the subject, until that happens, we're going to continue to be in this morass. We're going to continue to be in this situation where nobody understands what's happening, not even the friggin' doctors, because all the doctors are all trained reductionistically. And so they don't have a holistic perspective and training and methodology to engage to appropriately address diseases that are not like a sick liver that you can take out and replace, or not like a broken bone that you can reset and it's good as new. And you can't take those types of reductionistic approaches and rubber stamp them on the psyche, on depression. It doesn't work that way. The whole body doesn't work that way, because the whole body is a holistic organism, a holistic system. Even calling it a system kind of has this tone of automatic, mechanical, and it's not. Some of these diseases, which have been such a bugbear to the Western society, and the solutions which the West has developed, namely SSRIs and these horrific drugs that completely screw the gut, completely jack the gut mind, and completely numb out the person and addict them to the drug. And they're calling this a solution. They're calling this a solution. And you have educated counselors and psychiatrists that have gone through years and years of training that will fight to support such a methodology, that will actually consider people like me that calls that methodology bunk, that will actually approach me with hostility, as though I'm promoting something that's going to harm people. That's how messed up, that's how whacked our system has become. in the world of drugs. So we all know that what we fear or what we don't understand, we fear. We naturally fear. It's such a natural thing. And so when someone comes along and offers this entirely different take to the situation and says, hey, you know what? The patterns show that the methodologies engaged to deal with depression, to deal with child seizures, to deal with these very, very serious life-threatening diseases, the approaches which have been engaged are whacked. And they don't work. And they don't work because they're not wiggly. They're not of nature. They're a concoction from the mind of man, and a concoction from a mind which has been driven into scientific reductionism. And from that space is supposedly solutions to be delivered for an organic matrix. Please, get over your ego self thinking that, because that's BS. We are a wiggly organism. We are wiggly. We are not straightened out by any stretch of the imagination. And so I'm going to try in this video to offer solutions which are not whacked from the very start, but actually are based in experiential evidence, in my personal life experience, in the books that I've read of people's accounts of this experience, as well as some scientific literature where we've actually been able to utilize some of the really good methodologies in science to bring some substance to these theories that I'm going to be presenting in this video in dealing with these supposedly these impossible situations that we have here as human beings. And they're not impossible. That's why I use quotes, because they're not impossible any more than stage 4 pancreatic cancer is impossible. It's not. And people have been programmed to think that chemotherapy is a solution, and it's not. They've been programmed to think that pharma drugs are a solution for seizures and depression, and they're not. They're not solutions. They're Band-Aids in the best consideration that you could think of. But a Band-Aid is actually something that actually is designed to help you heal. These things don't even have that in the baseline of what they're trying to do. And the reason why you know that is because the side effects are so bad. And the long-term prognosis is bunk, it's jacked. Just talk to people that have been on SSRIs for 5-10 years as they've been walking through that whole minefield of trying to find the balance and constantly going back to the doctor. Mark that, constantly going back to the doctor, spending money. And that's the design. It's greed that's designed these drugs, not compassion. Nature is based in compassion, and that's why the drugs of nature are so effective. These drugs that are made by pharma, they're not based in compassion. They're drawn up by a board that is trying to figure out ways to make as much money as possible because they're running a company. They're running a capitalistic company, and the buyers, the commodities for this thing are human beings. They're pilfering human beings with methodologies that they know won't work. And this video is going to render that. And I take an entirely different dog to the hunt, and I get wiggly. And I know I've said that in my videos in the past, and when I say you have to get wiggly to fight serious diseases, I'm simply meaning that you have to align to nature. You have to use nature principles, which are wiggly. There's not a straight line anywhere in nature. Look at yourself in the mirror. There's not a straight line on your body anywhere. And the reason that is because nature is inherently vibration, and it's wiggly. It's on and it's off. It's here and it's gone. And it's just like music. And so you can't approach the situation of nature, the situation of music mechanically. You have to approach it artistically. The psyche is not like the body, and it's metaphysical in its nature. Can't get your hands on it. And so to try and impose synthetic man-made chemicals to solve a natural issue, a wiggly issue, is inappropriate, in my opinion. To get wiggly, to heal the body, we use plant medicines and natural therapies smartly. Just like the sailor that sails the boat, it's the mind that moves the boat, not the wind. It's the mind that's moving that boat, because the mind is engaging the proper therapies and directives in nature, in the environment, to appropriately move the vessel through the water. And you're trying to appropriately navigate this vessel, this psychological vessel that's guiding this body through life. And so you want to use these natural principles smartly. Okay. Now, how do plant medicines resolve, or how can they help resolve depression? Well, nature has a whole family of indole hallucinogenic drugs that nature has offered to directly address the psyche. And it's because you've been pumped full of fear and a lack of knowing and understanding these things. When I say indole hallucinogenic drugs, every single red flag is flying up like crazy. Probably some people have shut the video off at this point. And I understand, because there was a time when I was the same way. I was filled with fear just like that. And whenever anything was introduced to me that was illicit, and it had just been pounded into me, it's bad, bad, bad. Cannabis is a great example. The person can't even field the discussion. They can't even field the suggestion. And this is part of our issue, our problem as a culture, because we have been so inundated with fear and a lack of a baseline understanding of how we pharmacologically work, that we are taking our issues into the situation, and we have all kinds of baggage which keeps us from the solution. And one of my roles now on this planet is to help gently introduce people into these realms that they have always been told to stay away. Stay away. Your body is an electromagnetic transducer. It's basically what it is. And it transduces electromagnetic energy, the radiating energy which permeates the entire universe, the free energy. They make these machines that generate electricity from just sitting in a field somewhere. It's not even solar. It's just that's all this electromagnetic energy that's everywhere. And you are an organism, a being, which knows how to manipulate that energy and transduce it into materiality, into consciousness, into the ability to generate memory and be able to walk through the universe and go through the universe and generate all kinds of complexity from this baseline invisible matrix of energy, this morphogenetic, this life-inducing, life-animating energy which permeates the entire universe. So anything you're going to do in life, in any decision you're going to make, any of these things, all should be grounded in a fundamental understanding of what the fundamental is that runs and permeates and complexifies the entire freaking universe. Okay? And it's fine if you want to call that God. If you want to call that invisible electromagnetic energy that potentiates and animates everything, if you want to call that God, great, fantastic. Call it Brahma. Call it whatever you want to call it, okay? But any understanding you're going to have of the entire universe is going to have to be in that fundamental, based in that, bathing in that, okay? When drugs are synthesized, ignoring that, and science is an enterprise which ignores the electromagnetic morphogenetic energy, okay, completely ignores it. Just watch Rupert Sheldrake and his whole work on debunking science and all his work on morphogenetic energy, and you will see that science is lost when it comes to that. And that is a key feature to why the drugs that science synthesizes in labs don't work. It's because they are based, the drugs are based, they are grounded in a fundamental which obfuscates, which marginalizes, which rejects the electromagnetic permeating force of energy, which is everywhere and is in everything. If you're ever going to understand drugs, you have to understand that you're an electromagnetic being, you're an electric being. And drug compounds are basically compounds which manipulate that electricity that's running you. And different types of constituents and compounds are just like transistors in a circuit. And they have a different voltage potential that they introject into the body, introduce into the body or take from the body. And it's this on-off system. Alan Watts talks about it all the time in his talks psychologically. It's this on-off system that makes the entire thing run. And that's why the entire world runs on yin and yang. It's an on-off system. It's now you see it, now you don't. That's life. That's you. Okay, so when you take drugs, some drugs have an effect which causes all this electricity that your brain runs on, your DC motor that's run in your system. They can have a confounding effect in that they can bring about from the free energy that's everywhere. They can suck that into the brain and cause all the neurology to then begin to fire like crazy. That's what happens when you take cannabis. That's what happens when you ingest magic mushrooms. That's what happens when you eat or you drink ayahuasca or ibogaine or mescaline. Any of these hallucinogenic drugs which have an incredibly high voltage potential that they can introduce into your neurology. Okay, now follow, okay? This is very important. A coping mechanism is a stimulation that you have learned to introduce into the brain to release dopamine. And the way that dopamine is released is by feeding that coping mechanism, that electrical charge path that develops in the brain as you do something and see, wow, I feel good when I do that. Wow, I feel good when I do that. And you figure out the behavior of what you need to do or what you need to ingest to keep that happening, to cause that to happen at will every single day. That's addiction. A person can get caught up unintentionally in an experience that's giving them pleasure, but they don't realize that it's sucking all the energy and life away from all these other parts of their life. It's taking away all these other experiences, and they're dumbing themselves down without realizing it because they have become addicted to this pleasure. In order to stop that pleasure, okay, you have to know a way, you have to introduce a therapy into the body which is going to generate a stronger electromagnetic impulse into this electromagnetic sensitive radar that you've got running your brain. And until you do that, you're not going to be able to smooth out all this electricity. What you have in an addiction or a seizure situation is you have a hot spot of electricity in the brain. Look at this from a helicopter perspective. And these hot spots that they see on the computer when they're running the MRI and they see this extra ultra activity, that's that electromagnetics firing. And when you take certain drugs, it causes these hot spots to happen. Or when you have a seizure or when you have Alzheimer's, you have an overstimulation, right? Or in the case of a mental retardation situation, you have an understimulation of a hot spot in the opposite sense. Just think yin and yang. White is the hot, black is where it's grounded out. There isn't activity. And so if you're going to be able to repair that system, this electromagnetic organ you have to introduce an electromagnetic impulse which is going to shift the way the electricity is flowing. And that's what hallucinogenic drugs do. they smooth out the water by putting in this massive voltage, this massive introduction of voltage, electromagnetic energy that convulses the brain, and it takes hours for this to happen. This is why when you take cannabis every day, day and day and day, over and over and over again, what's happening is you are balancing the autonomic nervous system, mainly the electromagnetic fundamental, which manages the emotional seat of the body. And when you introduce cannabis time and time again, what you're doing is you're calming that system down and saying, here's the tools you need to operate appropriately. So over time, a person who appropriately uses cannabis, doesn't abuse it, but appropriately uses it, they will begin to find a stimulating balance within their life and a natural dopamine release throughout the day, which helps them to appropriately approach the world without having hot spots of overactivity or hot spots of underactivity, namely lethargy on the couch and drooling. You're abusing cannabis when you do that. So the indole hallucinogenic drugs, the natural drugs made in nature that these mushrooms make, that the ayahuasca vine makes, that the ibogaine shrub, that root that the ibogaine makes, this is nature offering to you as a human being a solution, long-term, permanent, to your problem. You see? And the reason why our government has made all of those solutions illicit is because they solve the problem. The government, these institutions run by greed, want you to continue to have the problem. They don't want it resolved. Because when it's not resolved, you have to keep going back and being dependent. And the whole idea of this whole system we have in America is to keep you in a state of lack and dependency, whether it's physiologically or religious, spiritually, it doesn't matter. They are trying in all of these different enterprises to keep you in a state of scarcity, to keep you in a state of chronic lack, so that you have to have the drugs. You have to have a savior. You have to have these different types of aspects that they are wanting to sell you and keep you underneath. Do you see? And so when you take a hallucinogenic drug, you are taking the antidote to those issues, to those introjected dependencies that have been put on you. And that's why they so voraciously attack people like me and people like Rupert Sheldrake and people like Terence McKenna and people like Alan Watts and Joseph Campbell. The reason why they go after these people is because they have figured this crap out. And they have figured it out, and they are giving people a multitude of solutions so that they can self-become, so that they can self-generate the energy they need, just like a plant from sunlight, to generate the energy needed to absolutely kick ass in life. A person who's in a state of constant dependency and constantly having to take drugs and do all these behaviors cannot transcend in life, because they are in a situation of chronic lack. This is the type of patterning that I am trying to make you aware of. This whole thing is about awareness. And I am trying to introduce like a beam of light on the planet, consciousness, awareness, and the methodologies and therapies that have been kept from you that will bring you to a position to transcend. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to sell anything. I have no interest in selling cannabis, in selling magic mushrooms. None of that stuff. I have no interest in selling any of that. I want to be a beacon of information and light and understanding of them so that you're not afraid. So that you're not afraid when your child has seizures. You're not afraid to say, hey, let's load this kid up with cannabis and let's solve this situation. A parent is deathly afraid of doing that because they don't understand cannabis. A person who is in chronic state of being overweight because they have depression, because they have to take SSRIs, they're in a no-win situation. Because the system is giving them a drug which is causing them to pharmacologically eat. And it's causing their libido to die. And it's causing their metabolism to completely check out. Right? So you have this person who doesn't want to make love to their spouse, who's gaining all of this weight, who can't stop eating because they're constantly hungry or they don't know why, they are depressed all the time, whatever the case may be, and they don't have a solution, and this is what's being offered to them by the system. And so they are definitely this tragic situation. This person doesn't realize all they've got to do is simply take one of these hallucinogenic drugs a few times and the entire thing will self-solve. Literally. Because a wiggly medicine will be put into a wiggly situation, and that person, when that convulsion of electromagnetic energy hits their brain a few times, and they completely realize, oh, that's the problem. That's why I'm depressed. All of these shells that their psyche has created to keep them from being able to see appropriately their history, all their abuse, all this stuff that happened, all that can be destroyed because when this medicine hits into the brain, it breaks down all the walls. It breaks down all the set pathways. It breaks down all the assumptions that a person has, so that they can actually generate, as an adult with some discernment, conscious solutions to their issue, rather than thinking, if I just keep taking this drug and numbing myself out, I'm going to get a solution going. That's not going to work. Ever. It's never going to work. It's never going to work. And the pattern in history, just look at the culture and you'll see. Is the culture really less depressed now than it's ever been? Really? You really think the antidepressants are working great and the culture is less depressed now than ever? Does the culture seem behaving more and more and more appropriately, folks? Does it seem like that's happening and everyone is getting more and more and more balanced, taking the drugs that these freaking white lab coat doctors are promoting and pilfering on customers? Do you see? It's so important that you take the time to contemplate this, man. It's so important that you take the time to contemplate this, because the solution is not going to be handed to you. You have to go out and get it. Fearlessly go out and get it and stop being controlled by these systems which keep you in a state of dependency and lack. And the only way you're going to get out of that is by fearlessly relinquishing all this insistence that you're putting into the world and all these assumptions which you've rubber stamped onto your brain that someone else gave you. The only way you're going to get the whole pulse is if you go out, you yourself, and take all the information out, triangulate it with your own experience, and from that point, develop a solution.